We can look at the past, we can undo the dysfunctional dynamics, we can learn the new tools, we can change our limiting beliefs. But if there's resentment that's still corroding the dynamics, then it's really hard to move forward. So this is where I think a lot of people get stuck, and they talk about like, well, what do I do with all this anger? What do I do with this resentment? It has corroded my filter of my spouse. Like, I can't get past what I know they did, or the ways in which I felt alone or betrayed or disappointed. And it's a really hard thing to get over mentally. So even when there's a will, even when there's a great vision, when there's a lot of love between you and a commitment to really work it out, if there's still a lot of resentment that can't be processed properly, it will keep you stuck. And I'm just going to do like a brief overview of, what resentment is. I want to define it, what it looks like, how you can tell either in yourself or in your spouse if that's what's coming up, and there's two main myths. There's a few misnomers about resentment, but I'm going to focus on two main myths that people have about resentment, and then what it really takes to clear resentment once and for all. Basically, the Webster Dictionary definition of resentment is that it's an emotional state that results from a slight or an indignity or feeling offended, and it suggests a lasting sense of indignation or ill will. So it's not just like your traditional anger where it's like something happens, you get mad and you have a reaction and then you move on. Now, resentment can come from angry outbursts over time that you've never like really healed or repaired. But really, I think of resentment as more like a simmer, like something that it is caused by small betrayals over time. And it is a form of anger. Like, I put it under the category of anger, but it's not explosive, overt anger. It's more like just bubbling in the background. It usually comes from hurts. It usually comes from an accumulation of like micro hurts, microaggressions, and it creates walls. So when you have enough hurts, or there's been enough small things that either rub you the wrong way or something hurt your feelings, but you feel like you didn't get the repair, that starts to compound over time. So if you've been married for 20 years or more and you haven't adequately cleared those out, you have like a huge backpile of resentments, and it actually starts to corrode everything in the relationship. So John Gottman actually has mentioned, and a lot of you know who John Gottman is, but he mentions a psychologist named Robert Weiss, who he coined this term negative sentiment override, which is essentially describing the symptoms and patterns that come from broken trust in relationships. So a lot of times resentment can come from broken trust in small ways, like not necessarily like an infidelity, like overt betrayal of trust, like I just, sold the house and didn't tell you, nothing big like this. But broken trust comes from being invalidated chronically, being ignored, having your thoughts or feelings minimized, not creating a safe space, not respecting someone's boundaries. These are all things that can cause negative sentiment override. And how I look at it, first I'll give you their definition, then I'll tell you how I look at it. But it's like negative sentiment override is the residual emotions that come from every interaction. It could be words, it could be gestures, it could be facial expressions, it could be body language that accumulate over time, that becomes it takes on a life of its own, and it becomes a new dimension in the relationship that derails the objectivity of the current interactions. Resentment derails the objectivity that comes from, that could be there informing the current situation. It clouds your filter. So you're not really looking at what's happening in the present moment. You're perceiving and you're processing what's happening in the present moment through the lenses of your past hurts and resentments, through the lenses of what you think about your spouse that's negative. So you have a negative sentiment and it literally overrides anything else that could be going on. And it skews your narratives. You start to assign negative meaning to everything. Like, oh, they're doing this because they're selfish. They're doing this because they don't care about anybody else's feelings but their own. They're doing this because they never care. Or this is how this person always is. And so it makes you not objective. You're not able to see what's happening in the present moment with fresh eyes. And that's how I see it. I see it as like this. It's like literally putting on the opposite of rose-colored glasses, like the gray-colored glasses where you're looking at your spouse. There's no love, there's no warmth, there's no beauty. Everything is just cold. And so without that love, you're not able to actually stay emotionally connected. You're not able to then problem solve, and you're not able to build anything in your life as a team. So I think of resentment as one of the most corrosive things that you can have in a relationship. How it shows up in terms of like, if you're thinking, I mean, if you are the resentful person, you know this already. But if you're wondering if your spouse is having some kind of resentment, I'm going to just share with you the most common ways that this shows up in a relationship. So number one, resentment shows up as being really closed off. So if you make a bid for connection and you're like, oh, look at that, isn't that beautiful? And your spouse gives you like a monosyllabic answer, or you ask them a question, or you try to have a conversation and they're just not meeting you there. They're not making eye contact with you. Not making eye contact with you and barely giving you anything back in a conversation oftentimes is connected with resentment or overt anger too. When your spouse is using a lot of generalized statements like always or never, or if we're looking at our spouse through those lenses of always or never, usually that there's resentment that's informing our perceptions of that person. And you're not just talking about what's actually happening in the present moment. Like I mentioned, like instead of just highlighting, hey, this thing happened and this bothered me, here's the meaning that I give this and here's what I would like instead, you go into this whole thing around identifying patterns and finding fault and globalizing and painting a picture of how this person is disappointing. That comes from resentment. Passive aggressive behavior, little sarcastic comments, little digs that you get in, or overt withholding. I guess that goes back to being closed off. If you're withholding affection or warmth towards your spouse, that is coming from resentment. It might even like show up as the experience of my spouse doesn't even really like me. I feel like my spouse doesn't love me. I feel like my spouse doesn't enjoy my company. Or you might even be thinking, I don't really even like them anymore. That is usually not because you don't like them anymore. It's usually because you don't want to like them anymore, because it will be feeling too vulnerable. You're going to feel too one down if you feel betrayed over time or hurt over time. To hold them in positive regard or to try to stay open to connection with them feels like a losing proposition. So this is what's important to remember, is that resentment actually is just burying the love. It's not that it's not there, it's just not accessible because it's hidden under the resentment. The other thing too is that, you know, you might get really hopeless right away if there's any sign of conflict, if there's any sign of like, we're not seeing eye to eye. You just throw in the towel, you just give up. And you just decide it's not even worth your time, because it's like, well, it doesn't matter anyway. It doesn't matter what I do. It doesn't matter what I say. It doesn't matter what I think. Nothing is going to make a difference. And that sort of just giving up quickly, that doesn't happen at the beginning of a relationship unless you have like a severe, you know, avoidance that comes from trauma in your upbringing. Usually, you know, if people are relatively healthy, and you're 10 years in and you're having these symptoms of feeling really hopeless right away, right out of the gate, anytime there's a sign that you're not on the same page, that's a sign of resentment. Also, lots of complaining and never giving your spouse credit. I notice this a lot when a spouse is like not willing to give credit where credit is due. Like, oh, look, your spouse did this really nice thing for you. Yeah, well, you explain it away. It didn't mean that much. They only did that because they wanted XYZ, or you know, you're not going to give them credit. You're not going to let them feel good about something. You're not going to let them win in the sense of feeling like they did something meaningful or valuable that you can receive. You literally are like blocking what they're giving you. You're just not going to give them that sense of satisfaction. And it's such a self-sabotaging thing too, because it's like saying, spiting you is more important than getting my needs met. I'm going to block love in my life because what's more important is for me to make you feel bad, for you to not feel successful. If that's what's happening and you get really honest with yourself, it's probably because there's resentment. And if it's the other way around, that might be it. And where I think people get it twisted is they don't realize how pervasive this is, and you think that just because something happened a long time ago, or just because you've already talked about it a couple times, that can't possibly be still informing anything that's happening in the dynamic. Well, that was then. You know, but if these behaviors are still happening, you might want to check in with your spouse and say, is there anything that you're hanging on to that we need to talk about to repair? And then the last thing that I see a lot is people will say, my spouse doesn't, they say that they love me and they say that they care about me, but they're not in love with me anymore. My experience is that's not true. Like, they just can't feel that. They might think that that's true. They might believe that. I don't think that people lie about that. They're just not able to access that because there's so many things that have accumulated over time that they just are done psychologically. Like, I can't get past what's covering up the love and I can't feel that anymore. But that in love feeling that comes from a place of excitement and expansion and hope and joy. And resentment doesn't let you have that. Resentment is like, I already know so much about you and I already have been hurt enough times that there's just no way that I can even open myself up to that joyful feeling of feeling in love with you. It's just a way to protect yourself. And not everybody's conscious of that. So if your spouse is telling you they love you, but they're not in love with you anymore, and there's a history of maybe you've been more dominant, you've been maybe more controlling, or maybe they've been more avoidant and now they're resenting you because they didn't step in or they didn't take space or use their voice, doesn't even necessarily mean it's all your fault, but it just is important to recognize that there's an opportunity here for repair. That's what has to happen. So before I get into the solution in terms of what you would need to do to clear out resentments, either for you or for your spouse, first you have to recognize what the most common myths are that I think derail people. And number one is that I think people believe that they have to clear it first before you can rebuild the relationship. So people believe that, well, I just have so much resentment. We're going to have to get that out. We're going to have to fix that. Then I can enjoy my spouse. Then we can have a moment of connection. Then we can have a nice family dinner, whatever it is. And we can have a nice conversation. We can go on a date. Well, we can't do that because there's too much to repair. There's too much resentment that we have to focus on. And this is part of what I talked about on Saturday, that the most important step 2 in this process of radical transformation in your marriage is you have to do a pattern interrupt, and you have to decide right away that you're going to table, as part of that pattern interrupt, you have to table the hot button issues, the things that are really triggering, the long-standing unresolved issues have to be tabled. And instead of feeling like you have to resolve those first before you can create any positive experiences in the relationship, it's actually the other way around. First, you want to expand the positive and have positive experiences in the relationship. And then from a foundation of emotional connection, a foundation of like, I remember why I like this person, then you can come together and you can like shine the light on the resentments and have some repair conversations because you have a little bit of money in the bank, so to speak, emotionally. So that's the first thing, is to remember that clearing resentment starts with first tabling it and remembering, okay, what is it that I love about this person? What did we love about spending time together in the beginning of the relationship? What does my spouse love that I could do that would help them to feel connected to me, or help them feel like, you know what, that was really nice. That was really fun. I had fun tonight, and just building a little bit of goodwill between you is super important. You want to start there first, build that connection, and then you can tackle the resentments. And I would say give it like at least 3 weeks of a good pattern interrupt of saying, you know what, we'll get there. We will get there. Especially if it's you, if you're the one that has resentments and you've been bringing it up lots of times, or you're acting those out and it hasn't worked this far, then I would say don't go right into that. You're going to want to just first express an intention to say, I recognize that there are resentments. And I am committed to wanting to clear those out once and for all so we can turn the page and enjoy our lives together. That's going to require some repair conversations in the future, but for now, I'm setting that aside and I'm just going to build on what we can. Now, you can say this overtly to your partner, or you can just tell that to yourself. Decide for yourself, this is what I'm doing, this is how long I'm going to give myself. And I'm going to write stuff down, capture it, set it aside, and then you can come to it later. The second myth, actually there's 3 myths. I'm going to throw in another one. But the second myth is that time will heal it, or that it will go away if you just don't poke the bear. If you just don't bring it up, if you just don't ruminate on it, it will pass, right? So as long, like if you think your spouse has resentments towards you, your tendency might be to just not talk about it. Like just hope that it passes. Let's just hope. I don't want to go there. I just want to like have a good time, and hopefully they'll forget all about it and time will heal that. And that's actually not true. It might be temporary, like you might be able to like, okay, we can get through a week where this doesn't come up again. But there's really specific things that have to happen. Otherwise, resentment actually gets worse over time because it just keeps building. You just have to clear it out periodically so that it never gets to the point where, like if you think of a hoarder's house and how it just, to have to wait until it gets to the point where you can't walk across the room is really difficult. It's much easier to clear it out periodically so that it doesn't ever get that bad in the first place. That's a really like way oversimplification, and I'm not a hoarding expert by any stretch. So, but you get what I'm saying, right? You don't want to let things build up that much. So the most important thing is to remember it's not going to go away. You will have to have specific repair conversations, and if you don't, you will have a significant barrier to intimacy. And that's actually what I forgot to mention this. This is another huge symptom of resentment, is that you lose intimacy in the relationship. So a lot of times, and it's not just men that will complain about this, women will too, that the passion is gone, that you're not able to have any affection or sexual intimacy, and that's because most of the time there is resentment. And I might hear from people something like, well, I don't feel like they really care about how I feel, so why should I be open to them in terms of intimacy? I don't even feel safe enough with this person. That comes from resentment too. So if you are not aware of this, you have to recognize that resentment will block intimacy, not just sexually, but just in terms of affection, just in terms of opening up to each other, that emotional connection. You just won't have that if you don't proactively decide to tackle resentment. Excuse me. Third myth is that venting will help to diffuse it, which is sort of the opposite, right? Like the opposite of just, let's not poke the bear, let's not go there, it'll pass, we'll just focus on other things. The opposite is to say, I want to talk about it all the time, I really want to like try to clear this out, I'm going to bring it up, I'm going to bring it up, I'm going to bring it up, and I'm going to bring it up. And if you're continuing to like vent it out, and what I'm talking about is not like having a conversation that you're bringing up to clear. I'm talking about the kind of conversations where you're venting, where you're wanting them to understand. See, this is why. This is what you always do. And you're wanting to explain or use an opportunity to bring it up. And you think that if you can just vent it out, then, and they apologize or they hear you, then you can move on. But it actually doesn't work that way, because venting, well, first of all, it's not a winning strategy. It's a losing strategy. It's unbridled self-expression, and it doesn't create safety or closeness. But that's actually a separate topic. What it does when you think about, and they discovered this when they were first looking at treatment for anger management. They used to believe that if you were going to be trying to process your anger, and you could have a punching bag to hit, or you could go into a room and scream it out, or you could go into a therapy session and just vent out your anger, that would help you release it. But what they found was it actually helped you stay in that emotional state, because what you focus on is what you create. You become almost hyper vigilant, like your brain is almost just like looking for evidence to support the reasons for your resentment or the hurts that came from that, and you're staying in the realm of the problem. So venting is actually a myth. It doesn't help you. That's very different than an actual repair conversation. Venting is not constructive in any way, shape, or form. You might think it is if you can get it out, but it's still getting dumped, and it actually doesn't ever come out all the way when you're venting. It's still in you, and you're actually reinforcing it through venting. So those are the three things that I want to really anchor in, if you take nothing else away, is to know that time is not going to do it on its own, venting is not going to help, and you do not have to clear all of your resentments before you can expand like a positive foundation of your relationship. So what I'm really saying when I highlight that piece of it is that timing is important. The timing of it and the steps that you have to put into place first before you dive into the resentments and clearing those out and moving into forgiveness and clearing the air between you. The timing is really important around that. You have to make sure that you have enough of a positive foundation before you get there. People, though, like what they'll do is they'll say, okay, well, I'm going to build this positive foundation, but then things feel good, they feel better, and then you don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to mess it up. Things are good now. But it will come back again. It will come back again if you have not actually cleared it out. As soon as something else happens that's triggering, if there's anything else that reminds you of that, if it hasn't really been properly cleared out, those lenses are still on, right? So you're at risk of falling back into that. So now in terms of the solution of what's actually going to really work, it's actually not focusing on the problem. It's, like I mentioned, expanding the positive first. And one of those things is creating a culture of appreciation. Expanding the positive interactions is something John Gottman talks about. Most of you are familiar with his work. And what that looks like is very different depending on your spouse and your relationship. It's very subjective. Like what's going to be positive in your relationship is going to be different than what's going to be positive in my relationship. So expanding the positive and proactively cultivating a culture of appreciation where you're looking for what your spouse is doing that shows that they're committed, things that they're doing that show that they love you, or that they're a good person, or that they still have the qualities that you fell in love with, even if now there's other things that bug the heck out of you. You still can see the good, and that you can express that to them. Even if it's in their love language, even if it's not your love language. But if you look for those things, you have to cultivate or condition a new filter, not only for yourself, because the energy that you feel, the energy that gets conveyed through your thoughts is very powerful. So even if you're not saying anything, but you're judging your partner and you're only looking for the negative and you're glossing over the positive, that will be felt, and that will not create a culture of appreciation. So it helps you feel better, but it puts money in the bank for your spouse as well if they feel appreciated. Also, the other thing you can do is you can express feelings. So when it comes to processing resentment, you want to express feelings and emotions that you are having and the meaning that you give something, and frame it as a share, not as an accusation. If you keep your communication focused on sharing about you and not coming in talking about them, that is a really big first step in laying the foundation for the conversation to be safe, for them to own what they can own, for them to give you what you need for repair, which also is going to be very subjective. And I think that that's one of the things that I would recommend too, is that you want to identify, what do I actually need to turn the page to let go of these resentments? Do I need an agreement? Do I need acknowledgement? Is what's missing true acknowledgement of the impact that something had on you because they minimized it? If that's what you need, it's up to you to say, this is what I need to feel better. And then it's on them if they don't give it to you. It's not on you. You created that opportunity and then they didn't take it. That's disappointing, but you have to be willing to risk that to be able to open that up and to get what you really need, right? Because it's the whole thing of you're going to miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. You have to open yourself up for that possibility of being disappointed, but for the purpose of being able to say, this is what I need. And so think about it. Do I need an agreement? Do I need acknowledgement? Do I need an apology? Do I need a new plan? Do I need a certain amount of time to go by with certain actions that are an antidote to the hurts that I had? You get to decide whatever you want to ask for. But it's important to take ownership over what you need, because your partner might be trying to repair in their way and giving you what would work for them, and then they feel like they're failing and then they give up because they don't know what you need. And you might think it's really obvious, but it's not, and vice versa. The other thing I think is really important too is that, and this is not to minimize anything that caused hurt for you in the relationship and the resentment that you might have around that, but always looking for recognizing the part that you might have played in creating the situation or playing a part in a dynamic that would have allowed something like that. Asking yourself the question. It might not even be that you can own 1%. And if you really can't, that's fine. But ask yourself the question first. What part did I play? I've asked this of myself with my husband. There's things where I've resented him. And then I say, when I ask myself the question, what part did I play? There's almost always something that I can say, yeah, okay. If I hadn't done that, I can see the part I played. Even if it's 2%, 5%, doesn't matter. And the reason why that's important is not because you still don't need repair, or that you're not worthy of repair, or that you don't have a valid reason to have resentment. What it means, though, is that you come back into your power and you recognize, I have power. I can create something better. I can ask for more. I can get my needs met. And there's things that I can do to create an environment that would be more supportive of what I really want. And if there's any part that I play to create an environment that would lead to things that would cause resentment, then I have to clean up my side, right? We've talked about this before, but I can't overemphasize how important that is. And it really comes up in almost everything that we do. So I have to mention that. And then the final thing that you have to do is you have to be willing to create a new narrative starting now, starting with you. If it's something your partner has owned, if your partner has expressed acknowledgement and understanding, I recognize the ways that I have hurt you. I recognize the ways that I have failed you or fallen short because of my own limitations. And they've committed to something new, and they are doing these things now. Then you just have to make a decision to say, I'm going to step into the new narrative. I'm going to allow myself to receive the things that are new now that fix it. You know, a lot of times we want the other person to like fix it for us, but we're not actually willing to receive that. We're not actually willing to turn the page in our own mind. And it is hard if there's still things happening that remind you, if there's cues and triggers that are similar to the experiences that created resentment, then you might have to ask for something to be different, right? That's part of finding out what it is that you actually need to clear those resentments, that you're not doing things you're not participating in something in the relationship and then you're like hating on your spouse in your own mind and judging them because you're doing something or participating in something that you have to own, right? So I think that it's important to just make that decision for yourself. Like, am I willing to let it go? And if you are, that means you have to ask for what you need to let it go, ask for what you need to go forward, to say, this will be the new foundation that I can trust, that I can lean into, and to be open to things being different. And then there's one last thing that I actually hadn't thought of sharing until just now, which is I think we have to remember that betrayals happen in every relationship. There's no way that you can get married and open your heart to someone without getting hurt at some point in the relationship. The limitations of our partner, whether it's their own upbringing, their own trauma, their own limiting beliefs, their own insecurities, whatever it is, we are human beings. We come to the relationship with wounds. Sometimes those get activated in a relationship. Sometimes we fall short. Sometimes we fail. Sometimes we have good intentions, but we fail at our execution. And then we disappoint each other, or we hurt each other's feelings. That's part of a relationship. So it's not about getting to a place where nothing happens that's going to bug you or hurt you or make you have a little bit of resentment. The goal is to be able to have a relationship where you can repair it anytime you need to, so that you can come back into emotional connection. Because if you don't clear the resentment, you're not going to have emotional connection. If you don't have emotional connection, you're not going to be able to get on the same team. You're not going to be able to problem solve. You're not going to be able to talk about hard things. You're not going to be able to resolve something from the same team, even though you might have a different approach. You might have different strengths that you bring to the equation. So it is really foundational, and it is super important to be able to recognize that it's not about never getting resentment. It's about making sure that you keep your eye out for it, know what it looks like, bring it up, know how to initiate a repair conversation, know how to talk about stuff in a way that keeps it on your side of the street, where you're sharing about yourself, your feelings, your interpretations, your needs, your wishes, and your asks. And just to own those without apologizing. And if you do that, there's nothing wrong with that, because if you really are doing that, you're not crossing any lines, you're not violating anybody's boundaries, you're just sharing about yourself. And I don't think we can ever go wrong if we do that in a way that's healthy. When I'm talking about sharing about yourself, that doesn't include unbridled self-expression. If you want to look into that a little bit more, I do have some other videos on YouTube about unbridled self-expression and some other losing strategies. These are communication strategies. That's not the purpose of this talk. This is really just about recognizing resentment, recognizing how it might show up in yourself and your spouse, and how important it is to actually be able to clear it out. Also, the purpose of this is really to normalize it to a degree of saying, like, if you have resentments, and I've worked with people who have been together for 40 plus years who have said, I don't know if I can get past my resentment. I don't know what the hell to do with all this anger. I am so mad. It's been like this for so long. Now they're finally doing things right. And I'm like, why did it take you this long? Right? there's resentment that is going to get in the way of actually getting what you want. Part of that is normal. It just takes time, but just know that. It doesn't mean you can't get past it. It just means that you feel safe enough now to share that and to be where you are, and that's okay too. It's okay to say, I'm not there yet where I'm totally past resentment. But as long as that's your goal and that's your intention and you're willing to talk about it, you're golden. That's healthy. And then also what I want to share with you guys is that if you are listening to this and you know that this is a thing in your marriage and it's something that you want help with, maybe it's something that you're clicking with or you're resonating with and you're understanding this intellectually, but you need help with the how, or you need help getting traction, or you just really want to do a deep dive into your specific dynamics to get like an assessment, you can book a free call with me if you want to. I will put that in the chat box here. You can book a call, monikahoyt.com/talk, and it will be either with me or one of my coaches to just get a sense of like what's happening in your relationship. What have you guys already tried to do to repair? What isn't working? And then we can give you a real prognosis or a real assessment. If we think we can help you, we'll let you know. If we think that we can't, we'll let you know that as well, and we'll point you in the right direction. So either way, feel free to book a call. We have openings right now. And I'll be looking for your questions in the future. And thank you, Chris. I'm so glad that you were able to join. That's so great. All right. Talk to you soon, guys.